Okay, we'll be getting started in just a moment here. Let me finish the last little bit of setup and we will get this started. Okay. Hopefully this is loud enough here. If there's any issues with audio, let me know. The last stream I tried doing, I had a second mic turned on at the same time and got quite a bit of feedback that I wasn't able to recover afterwards. But I think I fixed those issues. So I'm hoping all is good as of right now. So in my last stream, I went through and talked about and showed how I created this portrait of this photograph that I had gotten a copy of, which is this one right here. I'm currently working on a portrait of a former professor of mine to accompany an article that I wrote for a website, and I want a kind of a picture that looks somewhat like him to accompany the article. Unfortunately, I don't have any actual photographs of him. This is quite a few years ago when he was my instructor, well before everybody was carrying a camera in their pocket, and somehow I don't have any pictures of him, and I don't know anybody that has a photo of him either. His name was Bob Ronchetti. He was a professor at Mount Sac in Walnut, California. So I went online and looked for a bunch of pictures that were probably really close to the way he looked, and this is really similar to what I found. And I use this as a basis for the drawing that I created and try to make the necessary changes. To represent a little bit more likeness of what he looked like, and this is pretty close to that there. So tonight I'm taking this drawing that I did. I already scanned it in, and I'm going to be doing a digital painting of it tonight in Photoshop. So let's go ahead and switch over to Photoshop and bring in that drawing. So and I don't see it updated on the stream yet. That's a little bit troubling. Let me double check my settings here. Streaming. All that's going. Not sure what's happening here. Let me double check my settings here. Thought I had this all set. Oh, there we go. Looks like everything's working okay. For some reason, it didn't update on my other screen. Oh, there we go. Okay, so I'm going to be primarily working in Photoshop tonight, and I'm using an older version of Photoshop. I'm using Photoshop CS 6.5. I know that's pretty, it's a couple years old at this point, but let me go ahead and import my scan. Alright, so I just did a basic scan of this. Usually when I scan in a drawing, even if it's in black and white, like a black and white pencil drawing, I usually scan it in its color. A lot of times you'll get a greater range for what is actually captured in the image itself, and then I'll come back in here and I'll convert it to grayscale. And I'm going to do a couple of different things with the drawing here to isolate basically all the pencil marks separate from the white background to set up the painting. So first I'm going to convert this to grayscale. It'll discard any color information in the image. And then what I'm going to do is try to isolate all of the actual lines in the drawing, which I'm doing here. I'm going to try to bring up all of the dark a little bit more first. Try to get all that about the right level. Let's see here. I don't want too much of the smudge marks that are in there, but I do want it as dark as possible for this. So from there I'll go to my channels and I'm going to try to isolate all those lines. That's a little bit better. All right. From there I'm going to So from there, I basically deleted the entire white background, but I actually maintained all the lines from the line drawing there. And I will deselect that. And then now I have the start of what I'm going to be using to start drawing. Okay. There we go right there. That's a little bit better. And let me bring in a new layer. Set that below, and I'm going to set that as white. And I'm also going to bring in one more layer. And make sure it's below the line layer. And what I'm going to do with that layer is I'm actually going to fill in everything a single color or a solid color. And I'll show you why in just a moment here. Oh, you know what? I forgot to. I need to go back up here, and now it was grayscale before, but now that I've isolated all the lines separate from the background, now I'm going to switch back to RGB color. And actually, I need to go back. I actually missed a step here. Let's do this. Which mode? RGB. There we go. Now it's back in RGB, and now I can actually do those other layers to set up the actual start of the drawing. That's going to be my background. And I'll make the background white. And you can see the drawing comes out back out again. But it's just the lines that are isolated there. And I'm going to bring in one more layer. And I'm going to also have that under the line drawing. And that is the layer that I'm going to color on. So now I could color independent of the lines. Basically coloring under the lines. And this is going to be, I'm going to name that layer color. Alright, so first thing I'm going to do now that I have all that set is I'm going to fill in the entire figure with a single color. It really doesn't matter what color you do this with initially. What you're doing is isolating the live image or the live area that you want to color. And this is going to set it up in a way that you could color without going outside the lines. And in some spots I'll probably go just a little bit over, especially where the hair is, to give us a little bit of flexibility when we're coloring. So all that time when you were a kid and your teacher, your parents told you never to color or outside the lines, well, if you set it up this way in Photoshop, it'll be automatic. You won't be able to color outside the lines. A little bit more here. And I'm just clicking one space at a time so I don't drag over an area that I don't want colored and covered in this color here. And that looks pretty close. One or two small areas here that I still want a little bit extra wiggle room with the color. And I think that's just about it. Kind of looks cool just like that, but we're going to take it a lot further than that right now. And if I take off that first layer, you'll see that that is just kind of a silhouette of the image right there. But here's what I'm going to do. So on the layer that I have selected where I just have the color, you have all this background area where there's nothing there. There's not a white background, it's basically transparent. So what I'm going to do is up here there's a tool where it says lock, and it's going to lock the transparency. Now what that does is that it locks this area so I can't affect that area, and I'll give you a quick demonstration of what that means. So if I select another color here and I try to paint over, it won't go beyond that area. So I'm coloring, that makes it a lot easier to stay within the lines, which is what I was talking about before. It would have made coloring in kindergarten so much easier to do it this way. So let me back off those changes, and we're good to actually start the painting. We still have that locked. We're going to bring that in, and we are set to begin. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to start trying to lay in his skin tone here. And a lot of times when you're doing a digital painting, it helps to start with the lighter tones first and then build on top of that. Now if anybody's watching that has a lot of experience with digital art, drawing, is a little bit more well versed in this, will probably already know this, but Photoshop, even though it can do painting and do art this way, is really intended more of a photo manipulation program. It's really not made for digital painting. And even though you can manipulate colors and do a lot of cool things here, it doesn't do true digital painting, because what that means, what true digital painting is, represents what paint would do on a canvas in basically in the real world. And Photoshop doesn't really simulate it that well. You could kind of get close with some things, but it doesn't do it that well. The program that does do it, that most professional artists use, is a program called Corel Painter. And that does a great job in simulating the way paints mix on a canvas, especially with different textures. You get a lot closer to what you'd be able to do with actual acrylic paint on a canvas. All right, so let's test out this as a initial skin color. It's okay. I think I want it a little bit more grayed out. I'm going to go for a little bit more of a muted version of the painting, and there's going to be some other effects I'll be doing on top of it too, which might be in a separate session. But this makes the whole process a lot nicer because you're painting under the lines. And I'll come back after and clean that up when I start doing his beard and those items. I'm actually going to make my brush a little bit smaller here to get into some of these smaller areas. And from here, a lot of it is kind of playing and experimenting. I've done quite a few tests with this, but I have not done a lot of digital painting in and of itself. and I'm using a computer mouse to do this, so it's a little bit awkward for some people. I don't have a Wacom tablet, otherwise I'd probably be using that instead. I've used them in the past, even though those are awkward to use at times. It's almost like applying makeup. It's an interesting color here. And so what's nice to see, I can just run the mouse all the way around the edge, and I don't even have to be that careful right there because it's not going to go past that point that I locked in. And just like that, you start having some real life to your drawing. If you have access to Photoshop at home, it might be cool to have, or fun to have your kids do this at some point too. Just digital paint, there's no cleanup. They're not going to ruin the dining room table. And that's our initial start. Let's get a little bit of his ears here. I think what we're going to do next is I'm going to change this color just a little bit for his bottom lip. I think we're going to go with just a tad bit darker and see how that looks. Especially since that area is going to probably be in just a tad bit more shadow because of his beard in that area. And we want to get a gray of a color. So we don't want a true black and white. I think we're going to go more for like start with a darker color like this first. Maybe a little bit more in the burnt sienna area. And then just kind of slowly lay in. Actually, that's way too dark. It's not quite the right tone. Maybe a little bit more blondish. I'm trying to think back 20 years. And if you don't like your color, you can back off. You could go to history. You could undo. Or you can simply go straight over the previous color. Like I said, Photoshop is not a real painting program. It does not really simulate the way colors mix together, which is why it's acting more as a, at least right now, as an opaque color. I can make these transparent and make them look like they're layering a little, layering on top of each other a little bit more, but it's still not reacting the way paint actually does when you mix it on a canvas, or when you mix paint, like especially acrylic paint. Okay, we'll keep that as the initial color and then build from there. Let's see here. What I'm also going to do is I'm also going to change the brush to be a little bit different instead of the circle, and we're going to experiment with some of these different lines and these different brushes to see what different textures we could kind of make in different patterns in the color. This one looks like a grass. Oh, look at that. You could actually simulate the beard just with that brush stroke. Not quite what I want, but pretty interesting nonetheless. Let's see. Let's try it a little bit smaller. Let's see if we get a different effect that way. A little bit. Adds a little bit of texture there. A little bit of lightness. So we're gonna build this up in probably several different layers to kind of get it to the tone and look that we actually want. Once we get that general tone set in, we can start thinking about lighting too. If he was in a room with a single light source, and if that light source was coming from the left side here, how would that affect the shape of his face, where the shadows fall? And we can start making some of those considerations as well. Bigger brush. maybe we'll go with a brighter white first. Come back to one of these thinner strokes again. There are also ways in Photoshop to make custom brushes, so you're not just subject to the ones that are here. All the brushes that you see on the screen right here in this area are all default brushes in Photoshop. And if you have not seen it before, you can actually load brushes right here. And I thought I had other ones already appended. Yeah, so I already have some preset ones here. Wet media, thick heavy brushes, square brushes, special effect brushes. Some of these brushes have a pattern attached to it. So when you lay a brush stroke down, it then rotates as you go across the surface. Let me see if I can actually find one that might do that. Let's do pin those at the end. I think I already had some of those there, but for instance, maybe if we do it right here, you can see it a little bit easier. Let's see. So this is a calligraphy type brush, so you could actually get a really thin stroke if you go just up and down, but the moment you go towards a curve, you get that kind of an interesting effect like that. So you can simulate, calligraphy or even 3 dimensions right there. A lot of using Photoshop and programs similar to this is based purely on experimentation, and it's one of the best ways to learn. So once you get some of the basics down, just go ahead and play with it as much as you can. I think you'll be pretty pleased with the results. So let's get back to trying to get the beard in a more finished state. Still trying to decide what brush would be best for this one on here. Let's try this one here. Just going to lay in some interesting texture here. Kind of liking that. The only thing I worry about with doing something like this with this texture is that in a lot of circumstances or a lot of different situations, you create a texture that is so far different than the texture of the rest of the picture that it starts to stand out and then take away from the rest of the drawing. So you have to kind of use it sparingly sometimes. But it really is kind of helping to better simulate this really scraggly beard. And kind of slowly working a little bit of gray in. I'll probably do some detail work later where I lay in bigger patches of gray and big streaks of white. But it's already looking fairly interesting right there. I want to do just a little bit more before I move on to a different area. There we go. That's kind of what I was looking for. And anytime you're working on a program like this, Control-Z or Command-Z is your friend to automatically undo. In Photoshop, you really only have one direct undo if you use the Control-Z key. But if you need to go back further than that, luckily enough, these later versions of Photoshop keep a longer history of movements. And if you go to Window and go to History, you could go back quite a ways. It's not infinite. There might be something in the settings where you can set it to go back farther, but I think it's set for roughly about 20 actions right now, which I don't think is a bad thing. If you need more control over your history than that, I would actually recommend saving on a more regular basis and creating different versions of your work. So like version 1, version 2, version 3, maybe even name the version based on what it was that you were experimenting with there. See, that's looking a little bit better now. Still a little bit muddied, but that's okay. I don't like some of this here. So I'm going to clean up just this little edge here. And remember, it's not these lines that are actually being cropped out that you can't draw over. You can draw over any of these areas here. It's only this background here. So like I said, I'm going to clean up this one small edge. Come back in with the skin color again. Except now I have that other brush set. A little bit better there. Okay, so slowly but surely getting there. A little bit more work on his beard is still needed, but I kind of want to start on doing some of the shadows, you know, the lighting effects on his face. Most times when you're looking at doing shadow work and things similar to that, a good starting place is starting with that actual color and then going to your palette and basically moving down in that color palette to a slightly darker color. That way you're maintaining the same tone, the same chromatic tone, but a little bit of a darker shade. And another thing to consider is the shape of your brush. If you consistently use a round brush, it's going to look pretty mechanical in a way, but if you change the shape of your brush, you'll get more interesting results for the way that light falls. This is purely an artistic choice, but it's something that I've grown to kind of like. Let's see if this different brush tip is something that I would like. Nope, not at all. In fact, that wasn't even directly what I wanted. No, let's go with this one here. And that is too dark of a shade, so let me lighten that up just a little bit. Actually, let me start around his nose a little bit. For this, I'm actually going to zoom in. One thing I like about this process too is if you have a really nice sketching style where you have a lot of these control lines and structure lines that you use to develop your drawing, it really adds a lot of life to the drawing. Doesn't make it look so, I guess, so digital, so mechanical, and even so cold in some instances. And it really does make it feel a little bit more alive, especially when you're drawing from a photograph reference. There's a habit for a lot of people to draw in a way that their drawing still looks flat, even though they're trying to emulate a three-dimensional object. Because all art on a two-dimensional surface, whether it's a piece of paper, TV screen, or something else, is all an illusion. You're trying to simulate a three-dimensional real-world object on a two-dimensional surface, and that is very much an illusion. So when you're beginning to use your light and shadow, you want to think about the way the light falls to help give it some modeling, start give it some dimension. This shadow is a little bit light for what I actually want, but I'm going to use it as a reference and build up from there. So the one is nose. There is a method of where that shadow should be on a drawing, just based on the way light moves and light falls on a three-dimensional object. I try to keep a lot of that in mind when I'm doing this, but I also base it off of kind of a romantic notion of the way I want the figure to look. So it will look romantically correct in terms of the drawing, but it may not always be physically correct in terms of the light and the dark. And I know I want to emphasize the age of the figure in the drawing. So probably going to have a little bit more shadow falling on the face than I normally would. You would probably have a lot less shadow or more of a structured shadow for a younger person. And kind of have some of those things kind of guide your decisions here. Let's see where else. A little bit here on the ear. Not a whole lot because it'd probably be catching the light. But maybe kind of more of the inner ear, representing that. Want to model this as if he has a more prominent brow here, even though there isn't a pencil drawing that kind of suggests it. And slowly but surely getting there. If anybody watching has any questions in the chat, I am kind of watching the chat, so I can respond to anything that you guys want to see, or I don't know, whatever you guys want. If I have any students listening, I can answer an essay question for you. Maybe we should do like a live quiz for some of the terms my students are supposed to know right now. A little bit too much on his collar, but I'll come back in when I start working the shirt a little bit to clean some of that up. Okay. That is starting to look fairly interesting. And it doesn't take a whole lot. I'm purposely doing this in a way where the color is really kind of muted because of some other plans I have for the drawing. I'm going to be adding some other features and effects to really dress up the image to better fit the context of the article that it's going to be going along with. But, you know, I actually could start working on the eyes a little bit too. I always like seeing the eyes start to come out. It's been advised by a lot of art teachers to really sparingly use perfect black, or I shouldn't say perfect black, using pure black and pure white, but using a tone slightly adjacent to the black and white is really effective. And some of the reason for that revolves around the idea of if you use a pure white, you don't have anywhere else to go in terms of your tone. You can't go lighter than that. You can only go darker than that. So it kind of limits your flexibility for what to do with the rest of the piece. I think I am using pure white though here. Let's go just a little tad bit gray. But the lines and the shading I already had in the area kind of help muddy that already. And maybe we'll just save the pure white for like a real true highlight. So if you have a light source coming from this side, it's probably gonna hit the eye there, and probably over here. Hopefully that's not too distracting. It may not be quite right in that one spot. Let me dial that back just a little bit here. It's almost there. be a little bit lighter than that still. There we go. Maybe just a small glint in that one eye. Because of the bridge of the nose, and depending on exactly where this light source is, if it's coming from this direction, it's going to probably hit there, but just maybe a small glint there. Reflective. We'll have to work on that one a little bit more. Because if we don't work that carefully, it's going to start looking really, really, really goofy. And that could almost wreck the whole drawing. Most portrait type drawings, which I do very, very few of, it is a really specified or special skill, and I can emulate it quite a bit, but I am not an expert on portraits by any means. Especially ones for likeness. It's an extremely unique skill. I know all the rules, but the execution of it is still somewhat challenging. Now I'm going to come back in here with a little bit of that darker color, just over the eyelid a little bit. Go even darker than that. That might have been too far. Yeah. That eye is still not right. I should almost back it all off and kind of start over. It's not quite what I wanted. Let's see here. Dun, dun, dun. Okay, so let me kind of back this off and start over again for what I was trying to do, and see if I could come in a little bit more more subtly. Let's see. Kind of at a loss on this right now. Let's do this. Let's go. I'm going to kind of leave it grayed out for right now. Hopefully just a little bit of a darker shadow right in that area by the tear duct. Hopefully make it so I'm hoping I don't make it seem like he has cataracts or anything, because that's what it's starting to look like in that left eye. His left, my right. There's a lot of incredible artists on YouTube, and I'm sure that even the 10 people watching have seen some really incredible stuff. And I'm not claiming to be an expert by any means, just some brief, quick tips on how to get started. Don't be afraid to experiment. Once you have that initial setup, you're not going to really hurt anything, and it's a lot of fun. I can open a new file here and start a whole new approach, a whole new type of style. You can even do a whole series of drawings that are all done in different styles and different ways. It's a little bit better. The eye still needs a little bit of work, but I'm going to bounce it around a little bit here. See if I can mess with the shirt a little bit. Get a bigger brush. Let's actually do a larger one first, then I'll come back in and do some modeling for it. My mouse speed is a little bit slow. I don't know if that is because of the recording or what, but it's getting a little bit slow. It's a little bit better. There's going to eventually be some other things growing over the shirt anyways, so I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on any kind of like detail or probably applying a texture, at least as far as the cloth goes. But I will try to set in the general color and a little bit of shadow and highlight on the shirt based on some of the same principles that I was using for the face. So my base color, and I'm going to do that. I'm going to go slightly darker here. Get a little bit of shadow under the collar here. Actually, I don't like that. I'm going a little bit closer. I think I'm going to switch back my brush, like that other brush I was using. And we'll use that one there, 45. See if that works a little bit better. Make it just a little bit smaller. And may not be quite the right tone. Just gonna draw this in first. I'll probably come back over it. I don't like that tone. I think it needs to be a little bit more blue in that. That's a little bit better. Be kind of subtle at first, which is fine. Let's go over on that side a little bit. Oh, that's better. That's actually what I wanted in terms of color, but I still don't like this style of brush. That maybe a little bit bigger. Yeah, that's better right there. So right here, just hit a little bit of a shadow that would actually fall from his head. A lot of times when I'm doing shadows, I like to make them somewhat erratic. There is a more accurate way of doing it. The shape of your head would actually cast a very specific looking shadow, but I kind of like the erratic nature of this one, especially right now. And when I kind of zoom back out, I'll take another look at it and work it from there based on what I think is needed. So light's going to probably come forward, hit here a little bit more, be blocked there. Do a little more of a shadow. a little bit sloppy on that one right there. Make the brush a little bit smaller here. And let's do the slightest shadow right there. Come back in here and fix his neckline a little bit. I kind of like these messy edges at times. It starts looking a little bit more painterly. Not too erratic though. There seems to be a kind of a fine line between painterly and sloppy, especially when doing the work this way. It's not too bad. And I'm sure there's more efficient ways and probably even better tactics for what I'm doing. This is a kind of a very bare bones and starter approach at doing some of this. And hopefully the goal is to create something that you like, that you find interesting, and that you have fun doing it. There is so much in programs like Photoshop and Painter that you could get lost just in trying to learn all the tools and then never end up creating anything of value or that you really take a lot of pride in. So I try to approach any kind of creative project in a way that helps me just get started. I think there's actually more to be learned that way as opposed to sitting on the sidelines and trying to learn everything you can first. And then you kind of have what's often referred to as analysis paralysis. And I also think it is one of the key components of procrastination as well. And it doesn't have to be perfect. I did a test one of these yesterday when I was still thinking about doing a live stream of this. Because I wanted to make sure that I at least had somewhat of an approach planned when doing this live, which can be a really nerve-wracking thing. People hold art really personal, and to do it live in front of an audience, even though to do it live in front of an audience, even though the audience isn't really big, is still can still be somewhat nerve-wracking for some people. Hopefully, the faithful few that have been listening tonight got a little something out of this. Maybe learned a little something new. And I would love to see what all of you end up doing in your own projects. So feel free to tag me in any of your Instagram posts. Send me a notice of a live video that you're doing. I like to see everybody's projects and see what everybody's working on. There's so much unique technique and perspectives out there in art that it makes for really interesting content. This eye is still really bugging me. I'll probably have to go away from it for a little while and then come back to it. See, that's not going to look right either. It's way too dark. Let's do this for right now. Do that. Go a little bit darker. My hour is just about up, so I'll be signing off in just a moment. But I at least want to get to a decent stopping point with this eye before I just take it too far, because I have done that before. And it's really hard to backtrack. So all I'm thinking right now is doing this in a way that kind of makes it stand out a little bit less. Almost like referencing it being in shadow a little bit more. Maybe that'll help our eyes accept it just a tad bit more than before. Back off these values little by little, so it's not a stark white. That might almost be there. Still think we need to go a little bit darker in the corner here. A little bit too big. Should back off the opacity on that a little bit. Come back in. Blend it in with the bridge of the nose a little bit. And I think that we are almost there. Almost. That eye still needs some work. I'm going to have to find a way to fix that. I might even come back and completely start over on that one eye, but everything else is slowly starting to come together. The beard is actually looking pretty good here, and yeah, I think that's a good stopping point for tonight. So that concludes tonight's live stream. Thanks very much for checking in, and I hope to see you guys next time. Take care.